Speaking of museum family, our speaker today is a gentleman that predates me. I've been around here for a little while now, but this gentleman predates me. Not that he's old, I'm not insinuating this. he's teasing me over there. But I want to say this is someone that has been helping out the museum. Speaking of helping the museum, this speaker has been with us for a very long time. He's gotten an amazing following as shown by all the people here today. And I want to thank him for that and thank him for supporting the museum. I deeply appreciate it. We deeply appreciate it. Dr. Edward Gordon is an internationally recognized historian, speaker, researcher, author. For 20 years, he taught at DePaul and Northwestern University in Chicago. He's made presentations for the last 30 years at museums, colleges, universities, conferences, professional associations, and community organizations. He is a distinguished lecturer for the Organization of American Historians. He's provided presentations on various World War II subjects at the museum here for the last 15 plus years. And you want to talk about a variety of topics in World War II. I get to have lunch with him once or twice a year, and I say, I'm kind of interested in this. He says, sure, I can do a program on that. It's fantastic, folks. And he's here today. We're going to, of course, be talking about creating the Hitler myth. Dr. Edward Gordon is the author or co-author of 21 books in the fields of history, business, and education. His latest book, here it is. I don't know if you've heard of Amazon. You can definitely get it there. I'm going to be bringing it out. We got a couple more programs this season. We'll make sure to have some here so you can get them signed as well. But his latest book, Divided on D-Day, How the Conflicts of Normandy affected the outcome of that, is a fantastic book. I've read it myself. It is fantastic. You'll want to add it to your World War II collection. But here we are today to talk about Hitler and creating the myth and the propaganda around that subject. Won't you please welcome our featured speaker today, Dr. Edward Gordon.
Well, it's nice to be here to see all of you, and I promise a stimulating, interesting, and provocative lecture that will help you orient what Hitler did and the propaganda of the Nazis and how that modern propaganda could possibly have an impact on the information you're looking at today and help you to filter fact versus fiction. At the beginning, though, I want to make it perfectly clear I'm not here to glorify Adolf Hitler, Nazi Germany, or the terrible Holocaust and acts and criminal acts done by the Nazi Party. This is a historical program. And I also wish to emphasize to you that I speak to you today as a historian, not as a politician, or someone here to help give you my prejudices so that you follow what I think. I'm here to broaden your perspective. We are going to take a look at propaganda, particularly how it was perfected by Nazi Germany. And we're going to take it apart, particularly the Hitler myth, and how Hitler and his minions were able to use propaganda to falsify information, how to distort and offer simplistic solutions to very complex programs or complex problems, and also how to use propaganda to scapegoat groups, and also the conspiracy theories that were used by the Nazis to persuade their people and others across Europe, and how if they had destroyed these imaginary enemies, everything would be fine. Well, here's our agenda. First, we're going to look at his birthday party, the largest military parade in history, and how propaganda was used to persuade the world that the Germans were truly invincible. And then how the Hitler cult came about, the power of propaganda in Germany, how everyday life was influenced by this propaganda, and what was the myth versus the reality of Nazi Germany. And then we're going to deal with modern disinformation, contemporary propaganda, and we're going to give you a very brief course on media literacy. Well, here it is, the biggest birthday party of the 20th century, Hitler's 50th birthday in April of 1939, before the war started. This is a great composite of Nazi propaganda and how it was used to impress the world on Hitler's magnificence, his messianic abilities to rule the fractured politics of Europe, as well as the military might. And here he is, taking the salute on the Oder den Linden, the main boulevard going through Berlin. If you ever go there, it's there today. And this was the parade. And there is the Wehrmacht marching down the Oder den Linden. Too bad Hitler didn't have half those troops for the Battle of Berlin in 1945. He could have used them. But there they are, mechanized and mighty. And of course the crowd of adoring people who saw Hitler as their savior, who had risen Germany from the ashes of World War I and now made it, they thought, the power of Europe. Taking the salute. And Hitler actually did exercises so that he could keep that salute up. He did strengthening muscle exercises, and he told many people how proud he was that he could do it more than Göring or anyone else. How do you create a cult? Well, the answer is propaganda. This is misleading or biased information used to promote or publicize a particular political issue or point of view. That hasn't changed. So what is the process to raise the Führer, the supreme leader, to that status? Or any leader today in the world? Well, here are the original authors. There's Goebbels. He had a PhD in literature. Hess, Hitler's deputy, and the good old boy himself. You start out with the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and there's the Word, the Holy Bible of Nazism. What is it? It's Hitler's famous book that he wrote. And there were two versions of that book. And that book, as you see, had $152 million royalties. It was issued after Hitler became chancellor. Actually, that's when it started selling. Everyone, when they got married, died, any official ceremony, millions of copies were sold. And here it was where Hitler was imprisoned because of his failed putsch. In 1924, he spent time in prison, where he dictated his philosophy and plan of Mein Kampf to Rudolf Hess. Hess you saw just a moment ago in the early 30s. 2 volumes. Hess produced this book, and he also produced the word Führer. Hitler was very impressed with Il Duce. Someone was just mentioning that to me a moment ago when he went to Italy. Duce actually was the first fascist in Europe. Fascism is really a form of state capitalism. It was being practiced by the Chinese for a long time after the fall of communist China, and now maybe Xi is going to bring back communism. But basically, it is the state manipulation of all means of production, not necessarily ownership, as well as all the political parties, the courts, the stock exchanges. That's communist China today, except it's somewhere between fascism and communism at the moment. So he introduced the idea of Heil Hitler. He started it. And of course, it's caught on, didn't it? The new messianic ideal is to replace religion, moral codes, philosophy with Adolf Hitler. How are you going to do that? Well, first of all, you're going to need a lot of propaganda. And I collect stamps. I've collected stamps since I was 10 years old. And one thing that I found out a few years ago is that the Nazis made more effective use of postal issues than any other country ever in the history of the world. They had more postcards, stamps, posters promoting Hitler than ever. And that propaganda and those postcards that they sent to each other and around the world showed Hitler in many poses. Here's one, Hitler loving children. Well, of course, everyone loves children. And every dictator, Stalin, Mussolini, they all are posed with children. Hitler was very awkward around children. When he was at Berchtesgaden and Goebbels and the others would bring their children, and Bormann, he never hit it off with children, and children didn't particularly like him. But they had plenty of pictures at his birthday parties and elsewhere, getting flowers, etc. Also, of course, women loved Hitler. Here is a good example of that. And in the end, everyone loved Hitler and the new Nazis. And they flooded the movies and the radio and the newspapers with these photographs. By the way, Hoffman, his official photographer, they figured out that Hitler got royalties for every picture they took of him. So that was another source of tremendous income. And in the end, here is the farmers of Germany at a festival. Everyone loved Hitler. Here they are celebrating, and Hitler's in the middle there. He's right, if I can, oops. He's right here, there he is, right in the middle here. He's bringing them down the aisle, and everyone's talking to Adolf. And in the end, of course, even the gentle animals flock to the Fuhrer. Maybe he is the new St. Francis. Isn't this wonderful? So, here is a postcard of his 50th birthday, and these are all of Hitler's accomplishments. He ended ruinous inflation. He ended unemployment. Everyone ended up in the army. He made Germany great again. He ended street violence. He built the Autobahn. He gave everyone a car, the people's car, the Volkswagen. By the way, of course, only a few were built, but after the war, it is true, once West Germany was organized as a country, if you had paid for it, the West German government organized a deal with the Volkswagen people, and you ended up getting a Beetle. It took a while, but they ended up honoring it. And of course, they had all of the tremendous architectural accomplishments that they built, which we'll talk about in a minute. So these are all the reasons of Hitler's great achievements. Of course, he took away a lot of property from just a few people. He confiscated things. He wiped out political parties and churches, as we'll see in a moment. But, as I said, our gratitude is endless for the Fuhrer. Here is his birthday cake. Everyone gets a birthday cake. And more importantly, there were plenty of other Hitler items. Busts, watches, bottle openers, pictures, keychains, and of course, let's not overlook the Hitler stamps, which I'll get to in a moment. And then there were, of course, the great men of German history. There is Frederick the Great, Otto von Bismarck, and we also have Hindenburg, who had been the president of Germany, and then Adolf. He now is one of the great leaders of history. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Leader, ein Führer. One people, one country, one leader. Of course, they wiped out all political parties in 1934 after he became chancellor in 33. In 44, he passed the Enabling Act that gave him absolute control of the entire country. He packed the Reichstag with the brown shirts, wiped out all liberties, and they also started protective custody, which meant they could take you, put you in prison, never charge you, never have a trial, and do anything but they were protecting the country from you. Here is now the cult worship, the exaltation of the people and their savior. And then finally are the Hitler stamps. Hitler got a royalty for every stamp sold in Germany. He was the only living person ever on a German stamp. And every birthday, they issued a new stamp for Adolf. Here he is, the hero, the White Knight, who had reestablished Germany as a mighty force in the world. Well, was he the first rock star? Well, before the war started, most Germans thought so. But what was he really like? Well, first of all, he was very undisciplined. He arrived everywhere late. He never kept regular office hours. In fact, he rarely sat behind a desk. He wrote nothing. He dictated things to secretaries. He usually got up around 11 in the morning, worked till 3, but the work at 3 in the morning was mainly sitting around with his cronies telling old stories, and that exhausted most of them. Also, too, he was obsessed with cars. If anyone wanted to go for a ride, he loved to get in the car and drive, but he didn't know how to drive himself. He also was claustrophobic. You've seen Birch's Garden, the tea house, the Eagle's Nest. Have any of you ever gone to the Eagle's Nest? Yeah, I've been there. There's an elevator, huge freight elevator with glass on all of its panels because he was claustrophobic. He only went there 3 times. Also, he was incredible, had an incredible sweet tooth, even though basically he ate no meat, drank nothing, but he loved sweets. He also was a consummate liar to everyone. In fact, the closer you were in his entourage, the more lies he would tell. The new German Messiah. Well, he achieves this by suppressing all religion. In fact, if he had his way, after he won the war, all the churches in Europe would have been closed. And he assumed this new messianic stature. Here's a great quote: "The Führer is always right. Every last citizen must say this." In fact, of course, they had so many spies and informers down to the street level in every neighborhood that if you said anything different, you might end up in a concentration camp. The ultimate truth teller is Adolf Hitler. Well, here's what Goebbels had to say. Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident that they are acting on their own free will. And if you keep telling the people the same lies over and over and over and over again in more compelling ways and in different mediums, using medium, they'll believe you. Well, let's take a look at all those mediums, and there were many of them. Now, they didn't have the internet like we have. They didn't have television like we had, but they had many other ways of propagandizing. And the birth of the Big Lie program was born then and is still used today. So you make the lie big enough. Make it a whopper. Keep repeating it over and over and over again, and people will start to say, yeah, oh, you know, maybe Ed Gordon did come from Mars. You never know. Spectacular pageantry. The Nazis substituted religion with their own pageantry. Look at this Nuremberg, these stadiums that were designed by Speer, his architect. The huge Nuremberg rallies. Overwhelming spectacles. Brainwashing the masses by giving them these spectacles, the overpowering might of the Third Reich on display for the entire world. Look at that Nazi symbol, that towering over all those masses. And the pageantry, the ritual to impress over substance to basically validate the new Nazi truths. A cathedral of light, a religious experience transcending the word. And here is the ultimate high priest giving a sermon from his high altar. Now, there is no doubt that Hitler was a great speaker. He reduced complex issues to simple, understanding sound bites. He was a distiller of ideas. And as one of my German friends said, it's not what Hitler said that was important, it was how he said it. And it captivated millions. Mass hypnosis. And it certainly influenced people across Europe and the world. The Wehrmacht was reborn. Even though the Versailles Treaty had stopped Germany rearming, they rearmed anyway. And then there was a bombardment of lies in film, radio, the newspapers, carefully orchestrated by Hess, by Dr. Goebbels and his Ministry of Propaganda. 1,000 films were produced during the Third Reich. One of them, some of you have seen, The Triumph of the Will. Now, how many of you have seen this movie, The Triumph of the Will? And you look at that, and they're parading around, and they're pounding drums, and and you say, this is boring. Well, remember, you have to give people, the audience, what they want at that time. It wasn't boring to the Germans, and it helped them believe that Hitler was making Germany a powerhouse. And here she is, Leni Rosenthal. She was the filmographer that helped to create these myths, the Triumph of the Will and then the Berlin Olympics. And there they are, Hitler and Goebbels, editing the truth. They very carefully orchestrated these films, as Hitler orchestrated all of his speeches. And the radio, I think I've gone too far, just a second. And the radio newsreels. They didn't have the Pathé News, they had this, the German propaganda newsreels. And if you want to look at the manipulation of truth, just look at some of those German newsreels. They're available now, if you so choose to look at them. And again, how they portray the Wehrmacht all the way down to the very end. There are those great German soldiers holding back the Russian hordes. Even though they're only about 10 miles from Berlin, they're going to counterattack and still win the war. Right. These movies were taken at the front by combat photographers, as we did as well, but these were fundamentally worked into all of what the people saw and believed. And millions of radios were distributed free by the Nazis, so that everyone in Germany had a radio. And supposedly they could only tune in German radio stations. So radio really was the social media propaganda tool of the Nazis. Everyone could listen to the radio. And it was a tool, the most compelling tool of their time was to listen to the radio. And in the end, they controlled all media. All media had to be licensed and controlled. So even William L. Shirer, when he did his broadcast from Berlin, the author of Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, all of those scripts were carefully edited by the Nazis before he could get on the CBS radio network from Berlin and broadcast it overseas. Let me control the media, Goebbels said, and I will turn any nation into a herd of pigs. And we misspelled herd, I noticed. A herd of pigs. I didn't actually, that's the actual slide. I just noticed that now. A herd of pigs. Maybe it's parenthetical, meaning if they heard this, they were pigs. I don't know. All right, let's move on. And now, of course, we had the Berlin Olympics in 1936. Down came all of the anti-Semitic signs, posters, arrests of Jews across Berlin and Germany, and instead you had the glorification of the Third Reich. And there's Leni Rosenthal once again. She had Olympia, a tremendous movie that showed the prowess of Germany. And there's Goebbels and Hitler autographing Olympic programs for the adoring masses. Once the war started, Hitler's popularity fell. The German people did not want to go back to war. In 1914, when the war started, the Germans were joyous. They thought they would easily beat the French. 4 years later, they didn't make it to Paris, did they? Well, here now, 1940, June. In 6 weeks, the Germans conquered Western Europe. The people were absolutely overwhelmed. They couldn't believe this. Hitler was a military genius. The war was over. The war was over. Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, France. France had the largest army in the world at that time. Defeated in 6 weeks. What could Britain do? And they left all their equipment on the beaches of Dunkirk. Churchill would settle with Hitler like everyone else. Hitler was a political genius. So later in July, here's the victory parade in Berlin. I remember talking to a professor when I was a student who was in Berlin at that time. And I said, well, did they have a parade like? Oh, it was just a small little parade. No, 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 no. It was a gigantic parade. And the soldiers were so happy because they thought they would now go home. The men parading in there is the 6th Army. They conquered France. These are the same men who would fight at Stalingrad. Only 97,000 would surrender. Only 5,000 would ultimately return to Germany in 1951. So what happened? Well, there's Hitler, there's Göring with him, the height of their power. But Hitler had written in Mein Kampf 2 things. We will annihilate every Jew in Europe. 2, we will conquer the Slavs and give that to our farmers to create Lieberstrom, so that we will have a food-efficient empire and the raw materials we need. We will conquer Russia. So, before the end of 1940, he began laying plans for Operation Barbarossa. The victorious drive that would take Moscow and the rest of the Soviet Union that instead ended in 1945 in his bunker when he killed himself as the Russians closed in a few streets away. Here is a man that became a victim of his own propaganda. The Messiah who believed that he too could walk on water. So what was life like in everyday Germany? Well, first of all, oh, by the way, there's the stamps for the Hitler Youth Jamboree. The students, whether they were boys or girls, were carefully indoctrinated in camps. Everyone joined Hitler Youth. In school, the Nazi 1619 Project was taught, their version thereof, glorifying Germany and the Nazis, and of course, the idea of exterminating Jews, the ideas of the superiority of the Germanic race. And then we have political correctness, carried a little too far maybe by purging libraries of dangerous books. I think I hear sometimes something like that going on again. They're not burning them yet, though. And then, of course, we have hate, the Holocaust. The Holocaust that ultimately would murder 11 million people. And I'm not counting the casualties of the war itself. 50 million died in World War II, including 7 million Germans. The persecution of people, the people who are causing problems, the comparisons, the conspiracies, the conspiracy theories, such as the statutes of the elders of Zion that proved that the Jews were going to take over the world, written by the Tsarist secret police in 1904. To try to curtail the Jews in Russia, Tsarist Russia, still being promulgated by some today as the truth. It isn't. And of course, the control of religion. Hitler was very successful in controlling Lutheranism and getting Lutheran ministers to pledge fidelity to the Nazi Party, not so much with the Catholic Church, and some bishops and priests speaking out against euthanasia, and actually helping and hiding Jews in Germany, but also around the rest of Europe. Pius XII himself persuaded schools, hospitals, orphanages to hide Jews and others. 900,000 Jews were saved through the efforts of the Catholic Church throughout Europe during World War II, more than all the other groups combined. And of course, Germany was surrounded by enemies. This conspiracy, this chart shows how the French and the Czechs and the others and the Poles were surrounding Germany and were going to try to conquer Germany. And this justified them abandoning the Treaty of Versailles. And when I was in high school, I remember a contemporary of mine, we had to write a term paper on some historical topic. He wrote one on World War II, which used German sources proving this, that Germany fought a self-defensive war. They were convinced, and many still are. And of course, the popular actions. I just talked about the people's car, the Autobahn, and of course the military expansion and the expansion of industry ended all unemployment, to the tune, of course, that they needed 6 million slave laborers, that many of whom they worked to death, in order to keep the arms industry going in Germany to the bitter end. And then there were the future of Germania. That is a picture of Berlin that Hitler would rebuild by 1950. That dome, this dome that you see, oops, hit the right button here. There's the dome. That's the People's Hall. The dome was 14 times the size of St. Peter's Dome in Rome. Have any of you ever walked up to the top of the dome? There are 365 steps. You can get to the top of St. Peter's. Right, you get the idea of the circumference of that dome designed by Michelangelo. This was 14 times the size. The Congress building would fit 150,000 people in it. It was so big, it would create its own atmosphere and clouds, and they figured out it might even rain inside the dome. Talk about a superdome. That's what Hitler had planned. And then, of course, there is the new chancellery that he built. This is the gallery. It is longer than the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. He planned a victory column on that street that you just saw a moment ago, the Unter den Linden, that would make the Arch of Triumph in Paris look like a toy. It was so much bigger than that. And Hitler had total control. This was his concept of messianic. He divided and conquered. If he wanted arms production, he would appoint 3 different people in charge of it and let them all fight among themselves, so no one would have total control, and he would make the final decisions. That's one of the reasons why Germany was not super efficient, but was really very inefficient. Here is the national truth mouthpiece. And again, if you tell the lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Here is the myth, the all-powerful Reich. Here is the reality, total destruction, a highly inefficient government, a highly inefficient yet courageous men who fought in the German army, who were led to defeat after defeat after defeat. Some of whom participated in the Holocaust, even in the German army, unfortunately, with the SS, Gestapo, and others. 7 million Germans died in the Second World War. We lost around 450,000. Sieg Heil. And here's the myth that lives now. Hitler is alive. You all know it. He's living in Antarctica with Eva in an ice cave. That's why he's been preserved. Well, not quite. So let's apply now these propaganda lessons to contemporary America. Now here's a disclaimer. All the examples that I'm being made today are from a politically neutral position as a historian. If you read this, which took 15 years to write, one of many books I've done, and my wife, Elaine, is sitting here. She edits everything I do. As a historian, a social scientist, a fact is a fact if I have 3 independent sources that tell me the same thing. 3 independent sources. That's what historiography is all about. So what I wanted to teach you today is how to arrive at that yourself as a contemporary and living contemporary America. How do you filter out the masses of information thrown at you to decipher myth versus reality? Well, there's an awful lot of information, isn't there? More than ever. You're overwhelmed. It opens up many new potential avenues for the manipulation of the news. You have 24/7 televised news. And you have an overwhelming multitude of new media sources. I mean, in Chicago, the #1 accident, the people are going down the street and the cars are running them over. No, not quite. So, who do you trust? Plenty of talking heads that tell you what to think on television. No matter what you believe, I'm sure there's one that you love. And then there's a growth of what we now call fake news or alternative truth. So how do you tell the difference between truth and lies? Well, sensational news sells advertising. Keep that in mind. When I wrote Divided on D-Day, the publisher wanted me to sex it up. Hey, what went on with Eisenhower and his secretary? Was Montgomery really a homosexual? Why don't you put all that in there? It'll sell more books. Sensational, put that on the cover. That's not what we did. We didn't even go there. And what about old yellow press? The old, it's still around. I was just looking at an interesting piece in the paper about Queen Elizabeth and her latest sexual escapades, supposedly. But you know, it's more easy to spot fake news when you look at some of these brands of media. But the communist leader, Vladimir Lenin, said that the purpose of propaganda, quote, is to destroy the enemy from within, to conquer him through himself, to destroy the people's confidence. This seems to be fading in and out a little bit. I don't know why. To destroy the people's confidence in the social, political institutions, and to define a nation's beliefs, morals, and tribulations into confusion. That's Lenin's prescription. How do you do that? Well, folks, I'm just a plain, ordinary Midwesterner, grew up in a small town in Illinois, and I'm just going to talk to you in plain English. And I'm going to use some name calling to call the enemy an enemy. And I'm going to tell you lies you wouldn't believe. And I'm going to use emotional words to get you all stirred up. Beware of these things. The Nazis used them. Mao used them. Stalin used them. Fidel Castro used them. And some of our people use them now. Let's look now at some of the more contemporary efforts to do this in our lifetime. Here's the most famous political ad ever. I saw that live. This is the 1964 presidential campaign. Lyndon Baines Johnson against Barry Goldwater. There it is. Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd because Goldwater is going to offer you the nuclear bomb, or do you want the little girl? It was only on television once and was taken off. Let's look at some others. Vote Mitt Romney. America needs him. Yes, it can get worse. The first. Or because America needs an extremely careless president. Yeah. Or what about hope versus nope? This is propaganda. It reduces everything to your prejudice, to your leanings. And you begin to wonder, well, maybe they're right. So what is media literacy, and why do you need it? Let's go through this. Well, first of all, the influence of media is central to our democratic process. We have a free press. You could say almost anything. The high rate of media consumption and the saturation of society by media is a given. The media's influence on shaping perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes? Yeah. The increasing importance of visual communication and information? Yes. Visually, people are more attuned. Could I do this program without these visuals? Yes. Would it be as effective? No. My words reinforce the image. The importance of information in a society and the need for lifelong learning. What you know is true today is not what you maybe thought in 1960 or 1950 or maybe 10 years from now. Why? The world is changing for good and bad. The whole world. Certainly technology is changing. It's changed your life. How many of us in this room would be dead now if it weren't for the breakthroughs that have occurred in science and technology? Think about it. Think about your own life, the medical interventions you've had, or the diseases you've avoided. Think of the diet you eat, the education you had. Think of the educational opportunities given to you if you were in the military after World War II, Korea, Vietnam. They're coming for me. Okay. Okay, how do you spot fake news? Let's go through this very carefully and think about it. First of all, consider the source. Click away from a story to investigate the site, its mission, and its contact information. Folks, not all media is equal. If it appeals to your bias, you may be more inclined to believe it is equal, but check into who's behind it. Not all websites, not all magazines, not all newspapers, not all think tanks, not all political groups are what you think they are. You need to take the time to consider the source. Read beyond. Headlines are outrageous and contagious in an effort to get clicks. What's the whole story? If you only read headlines, or you only read the abbreviated version of a story in the media, what about all the detail? Now, Elaine and I'm going to admit this, we're extremists. We read 4 newspapers every day because we're researchers. Left, right, in the middle, the local rag, we read it all. And then I go online and look at the same story, and most of it's not there. Okay, that doesn't impress me. And I have nothing against media. I use plenty of it. I have 2 websites. I'm on LinkedIn. Right. I have, my books are available as ebooks and all that stuff. I'm not saying media is evil. I'm just saying there's more to the world than your favorite website or your favorite listserv. And remember, of course, you're being fed what the computers and logarithms say you like. And they're just going to give you more of the same opinions because that's what you like, that's what you want. Check the author. Do a quick search on the author. Are they credible? Are they for real? What's their background? What's their education? What accomplishments do they have? Anybody can say anything almost on the internet. It's not policed very well, is it? Support sources. Click on the links to support the actual benefit of the story or the actual origin of the story. Keep looking at it. And by the way, you're going to say, I don't have time for this. Our country is running out of time. We need an educated citizenry to make important decisions. I think many of us, all of us feel that to some degree. Check the date. A lot of times it's an old story that's just being repeated over and over and over again. Is it a joke? Sometimes I speak parenthetically in programs, and my wife is sitting in the audience, and she'll say, I don't know if they realize that you didn't believe this. You were speaking parenthetically. check what the story is. I have a whole list. I have several journals. I have several journals of stories, jokes, unusual facts. I call it the Secret Journal of Dr. Gordon. And I throw in these things because I want people to laugh somewhat during these programs, because so much of this is so heavy and so, but I do speak parenthetically. We'll see what that is. Check your own bias. I have no biases. Of course I do. Of course I do. We all do. And I recognize that. That's one reason why I force myself to read things that I don't necessarily agree with. I want to better understand where they're coming from. I may still not agree with them, but from time to time they do raise a point that I do want to think about. Ask the experts. Am I an expert, or I'm just a windbag? I read 1 or 2 books, you know. Am I an expert or not? Do you trust me? A lot of people seem to. Thank you, I appreciate it. I work hard at it. I've worked hard at it for a long time. Of course, some people will say to you that my wife is the brain and I'm just the mouthpiece, but you know. All right. So think about how you filter the news. And here are some fact-checking websites. Write them down on your program. Take a look at them. Take the time to confirm the accuracy of the information before you make up your mind on an issue, or how to vote, or before you enter the discussion. Well, is this tomorrow? America going up in flames? You know, Adolf Hitler was not an incomprehensible accident of history. He was a populist synthesis perpetuated by creating a messianic propaganda myth across German society. He did this by selling false conspiracy theories. He legalized fake solutions by attacking other groups across Germany and across Europe. The bottom line, fabricating conspiracies, creating scapegoats, those should be red flags when you listen to anyone who says, these are the problems. Get rid of this and everything will be fine. Too much of today's media is peddled on the same toxic sludge of hate and violence from the far left, from the far right of the political spectrum. And I'm not saying that hasn't been done in previous times. I'm just saying it seems to be more pervasive today. Spreading distortions and lies has replaced the traditional standards of fact-based reporting, where each person, you, the citizen, considers the information, you determine the truth, not the talking head, not the so-called expert. This has polarized public discourse. Many people are now distrustful of each other. Scientific research, they doubt. Experts in many fields, they don't listen to. The value of education is ridiculed, and the rejection of substantiated factual information seems to be the norm. The heavy dependence on today's social media sources continues to strengthen the spread of propaganda. It has effectively turned what has become for many the source of their news into the strengthening of propaganda itself. Too few Americans are taking the time to read more broadly. I emphasize that to you. Read more broadly. Read more broadly, rather than superficially. And read a variety of Main Street news sources. They're not perfect. I'm not saying they are, but they will broaden your perspective. Also, all social media, content, impression practices are now using logarithms to feed you more of what you want. Local news media has withered. Look at the local media here. I've been coming to this desert for over 30 years, and how that newspaper has withered. Withered. the Chicago Tribune, the Sun-Times. There are very few national newspapers, very, very few. While cable and digital are usually unaccountable for most of its content that is broadcast. So I feel I'm in the Twilight Zone. I was just watching the Twilight Zone the other night, old reruns. I feel like I'm living there now. Everything is turned upside down. I don't know what to believe anymore. Too much anger, too much confusion, too much self-doubt. If left unchecked, this distortion of information can become serious instability, can result in the United States. Incapable of achieving social and political compromise will undermine the fabric of this republic. The republic was founded on the concept of messy politics in a democracy. It always has been there, always will be. There always will be demagogues in our political parties. Both of them, or all of them, in the past. The concept, though, of an informed, educated citizenry is the safeguard of our democracy. That's what you need to be. The goal of this program is to make you more aware of what constitutes modern propaganda. Don't feel guilty about it. Take the time to do something about it in your own life. Simplified solutions of complex problems should raise a big red flag. Propaganda tends to do this using scapegoats or enemies lists, conspiracy theories, an explanation of what is wrong that simply isn't going to wash. Issues are staked out with a black or white solution, good versus evil. American democracy doesn't work this way. Collaboration and compromise help our nation move forward, not the nuclear solution of destroying the enemy. If we destroy the enemy, we will destroy the political process in the United States. We cannot afford this. We hope that I've given you some pointers to think, to rethink, how to separate fact from fiction. This is an essential, daily, ongoing exercise that is worth your time. Remember, the media's job should be to report what is actually happening. You need to interpret the news for yourself. Discuss it with your neighbors. This is a messy and at times personally unsettling exercise. Remember, today's facts can change tomorrow. As a historian, I remain optimistic about the future of the United States. We will outlive this twilight zone of demagoguery that we seem to be trapped in at the present time. I believe that optimism is based upon a fundamental ideal upon which the United States of America was founded hundreds of years ago, has persevered through many wars, civil wars, and other disturbances. And that is that educated Americans will never become the victims of ignorance. Thank you very much. Thank you.